This is the third workshop in the 2023 NYSSB Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black, and I'm your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages of the New York State Education Department. Welcome to completing the NYSSB School Notification Form. Your school has decided to offer the SEAL, and your SEAL committee has begun its planning. What is the next step? Completing the school notification form, of course. The presenter will go through step-by-step how to gather data and complete this form, which must be submitted by December 1st by all schools other than New York City DOE public schools wishing to offer the SEAL program. In this webinar, you'll learn the tricks to making this process painless and easy and earn CTLE credit in the process. So as I mentioned, my name is Candy Black. I'm your World Language Associate, and one of my responsibilities is the SEAL. I include all of my contact information in these presentations. If you have any questions about world languages or the SEAL of Biliteracy, I encourage you to reach out. My email is my first name, CANDACE.black, like the color, at NYSSB.gov. You can also reach me on my phone, 585-356-0951. As you can see on this screen, we do have a QR code with a short URL. That is the link to the handouts folder. Now, the handouts folder is currently empty because the only thing we're planning on putting in there is the link for the form that you're coming here to learn about, as well as the PDF of this presentation, and we'll do that at the end of the webinar. I also want to draw your attention over here to the left. Those who attend this webinar will also receive a certificate as well as this handy dandy little badge for completing this webinar. So look out for that in an email from me either tonight or tomorrow. So we have a quick disclaimer. The disclaimer is this: if you are a New York City public school other than charter, you do not have to actually fill out the SEAL school notification form because the data required for this form is collected and submitted on your behalf by the Division of Multilingual Learners. So if you are a New York City public school, not a charter, but a public district school, and you're interested in offering the New York State SEAL of Biliteracy, you should contact dml@schools.nyc.gov. And they actually do all the work for you in terms of this form. Now, as I mentioned, New York City public schools, when we talk about district schools, don't include the New York City charters. If you're a New York City charter or a New York City non-public, you do have to fill out this school notification form, just like all other schools in the rest of the state outside of New York City. This webinar is specifically designed for those schools that do need to complete this form. So let's take a look at our goals for today's session. By the end, you will be able to identify where to download this form, to explain each section of the form, the data needed to complete the section, and the sources from which to gather the data. You'll be able to identify the 4 subgroups of eligible SEAL candidates, locate where to find the culminating project rubrics, and identify the deadline and method by which the school notification form must be submitted. Now, finally, you'll also be able to find the contact information for our office in case you have a question about in the future about completing this form. So first and foremost, I want to mention that all of the information that I'm sharing with you today, as well as the forms, can be accessed on our SEAL website, which is available using the QR code or the website you see on your screen. But you know what? There's a much easier way to get there. All you need to do is Google the 2 terms NYSSB, as in New York State Education Department, and NYSSB, our acronym for the SEAL, to get to the website, and then just bookmark it for future use. So I want to start off with the website that talks about the school notification form. There is an online form and a template, and I want to be very upfront in the beginning that the only thing that actually comes to my office is the online form. And we're offering the template because often there's data on there that you have to collect, and we want you to be able to see all the data that you need before you actually have to fill out the form. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So the purpose of the school notification form is to notify NYSSB of your intent to offer the SEAL in the current school year. And we use this information to project the maximum anticipated number of SEALs and medallions necessary for the following spring, since we need to order them ahead of time. If you do submit the form, but you don't end up having any successful earners, nothing bad happens. because submitting the form only indicates that your school intends to offer the seal and you've identified you actually have some eligible students. If none of your students end up completing the requirements to earn the seal, all you need to do is send me an email so that I don't expect the end of your data form from you. Now, the person responsible for completing and submitting the school notification form is the seal coordinator, and that may in fact be you. The seal school notification form must be submitted by the same time every year, and that is December 1st. If your school misses the December 1st deadline, you are not out of luck. You can still offer the seal of biliteracy. So we request that these forms be submitted by December 1st, but we provide flexibility because life happens. Seal coordinators change, they leave districts, and sometimes it's just such a crazy world that that December 1st deadline comes and goes. So if you do miss the deadline, please just email me with the date you anticipate submitting the form, because after that deadline, I don't check the form results on a regular basis. When we say flexibility, we're talking about a month, right? We certainly don't want to get notification forms in April or May, but if you need a little flexibility, don't worry about it. We can provide it. If your school submitted the school notification form in a prior year, you still do need to submit a new form the next year you offer the seal, because this form is submitted by December 1st in every year that a school intends to have students graduating with the seal of biliteracy. Again, if we go back to the purpose of the form, we need to know how many students maximum we would anticipate getting the seal so we can order those seals and medallions. And if you don't submit a new form the next year, we won't have those numbers there. We often get the question, if my district has more than one high school that's offering the seal, do we need to submit a single form for the whole district or one for each high school? We do this by high school, so every school that wishes to offer the seal must submit their own school notification form. Now, we talked before about there being an online form and a template. So how do you use each? Again, the template of the form is provided so that you can print it. It's a 2-page form. You can write in all of the data because it might take you some time to gather the data. You may have to contact some people for it. And this way, when you have it complete, you can then go to the online form and simply fill it out quickly. Please be advised that the template, whether it's scanned or not, may not be emailed to NYSSB in place of filling out the online form. You must fill out the online form. I will send it to you following this webinar, and it's also linked here in the PowerPoint presentation. Another question we often get, and I have to admit I'm a little bit behind on this right now, is will schools receive a confirmation that the form was submitted correctly? Yes, I have all the ones that were submitted up into today, and I'm ready to send those out this evening. So starting today, schools that submitted their forms will receive an email with a re-merged copy of the form, so it'll look nice and pretty, and it'll be a confirmation of the receipt of that. If I have any questions on the contents of the form, I will include that in the email that I send out to you. But I do recommend that you keep a copy of this re-merged form for your records because it makes filling out next year's form easier. Essentially, you only have to take a look at sections F and G, and everything else remains the same. If you need to make a correction to the school notification form, I included this slide here. So any corrections can just be emailed to me at the email you see here on the screen. You don't need to resubmit the entire form. But if you do email me with a correction, please refer to the question number on the form that you're correcting. So for instance, in the F section where you are listing the number of students that are eligible in each category, if you realize that you wrote 12, but you meant 22, that's a pretty big change. All you need to do is send me an email and say, F1 should be 22, not 12. And then I'll re-merge the form to you so you have a clean copy of that form. Please be advised, if an additional student or two is identified as eligible seal candidates after you submit the form, that's not a reason that you would need to send in a correction, because the notification form is simply a snapshot. We're looking to get an estimate from every school to make sure we'll have enough seals and medallions to distribute at the end. So only if there are major errors, like the SEAL coordinator's email was typed in incorrectly, or you have major swings in the numbers of eligible students, do you really need to send in an email with that correction. All other minor things can just be ignored. So there are 11 sections to the SEAL school notification form, which you can see both pages here on the screen. We're going to go through each briefly and then answer any questions that you have for today. So let's start off with sections A through C. These are pretty straightforward, just school information like district and school name, as well as the type of school. You're either a public or a charter or a non-public. Section D is the SEAL coordinator information. So this is simply your first and last name, your 10-digit phone number, and your email. We rarely call people on the phone, but sometimes it's a question that's a little bit easier to resolve than via email. So we appreciate that there. And if you have an extension, you can list that as well. The data coordinator info. Now, the district data coordinator is, in general, someone different from the SEAL coordinator, because the district data coordinator has a very specific role at the district. They are responsible for uploading all of the graduation data every summer to our system that's called SIRS, and outside of NYSSB, it's generally called the data warehouse. Now, it's possible that you as the SEAL coordinator, that you also fill this role, but it's a pretty rare occurrence. So please make sure you've identified the district data coordinator and that you've put in their contact information there. Again, the district data coordinator is the person responsible for uploading all of the graduation data to the data warehouse for everything from 3 to 8 testing to advanced regents diplomas. So why is it really necessary to have the district data coordinator's information on this form? Well, we want to make sure that we are taking a look at the data integrity. And so we cross-reference the data submitted on the end of your data form that you submit in the late spring with the data that your district data coordinator submits to the data warehouse. It takes place over the summer when many of our SEAL coordinators who are teachers may not be available to resolve discrepancies. So we ask that you include the district data coordinator's information in case there is a discrepancy, so that someone in my office can get in touch with someone at your school who can help us resolve it. So you may be asking yourself, okay, but why do you really need to cross-check the data? Because submitting data twice can also lead to its own set of problems. Well, to give you an idea of why we do this, just last year in 2023, more than 800 SEAL earners reported on the end of your data form were not reported to NYSSB's data warehouse. Now, these students still earn the SEAL, but our data is incomplete. In addition, last year we had more than 60 students who did not earn the SEAL of biliteracy, but were incorrectly reported to NYSSB's data warehouse. So we want to make sure that we are really carefully keeping that data clean and that we're coordinating with schools to ensure that happens. So who can earn the SEAL? We're going to spend a good amount of time today really talking about those student populations, because we have a vested interest in making sure that all students who are eligible are recruited for this distinction. So any student from any New York State school, be it public, charter, or non-public, including religious and independent schools, who are graduating from high school with a Regents diploma and who can demonstrate a high level of proficiency in English and at least one other world language may earn the SEAL of biliteracy. Now, students may be studying a language at school, or they may speak a language other than English at home. So let's look at historically who our SEAL earners are. You can see on the screen the percentages that about 7% of students who earn the SEAL are English language learners. Almost 20% are former English language learners. About 60%, the vast majority, are students whose home language is English and who are studying a world language in school. And about 14% are those students whose home language is something other than English, but who were not identified as English language learners. And so we're going to spend some time with these populations because sometimes the way in which these are labeled can be confusing. So you need to make sure you're comfortable with both the term English language learner as well as the abbreviation ELS. And then understand that a former L is someone who was identified as an English language learner at some point, but has since achieved the proficiency level required to exit L status. And then, of course, a never L is someone who, when they entered the district, was not identified as being an English language learner because they already had that anticipated level of English. So as we go through and think about the next part of this form, you're going to have 4 subgroups of students that are eligible to earn the seal. So let's go through these. F1 are students who are current English language learners. Again, those are students who are currently working to achieve English proficiency in school. F2 are students who used to be English language learners. We call them former Ls, but who have since achieved the required level of English proficiency to formally exit L status. F3 are students whose home language is English that are studying a world language in school. These are students who are in your Spanish or French or German or Italian classes. And then our last group of students are those who speak a language other than English at home. We call them heritage language speakers, but they're not identified as being an English language learner, nor were they ever, and they may or may not study the language at school. Now, I really want to highlight our Ls and our former Ls because these are ideal Seal of Biliteracy candidates. And it's in fact these students for which the original Seal of Biliteracy in the state of California was established. And they were the first state in the entire nation to create a Seal of Biliteracy program. This graph that you can see here on the screen is the top 10 home languages of New York State English language learners. And you can see the vast majority is Spanish, but we have significant populations in about 9 other languages. In total, in all grades, there are more than 200,000 current English language learners. And there's even more former English language learners and heritage speakers. Again, these are ideal candidates for the New York State Seal of Biliteracy, and we hope as you recruit students into this program, you will make an extra special effort to include them in that process. So one of the questions we often get is, are the number of eligible students that we are going to report in this F section, which you can see the slice of that at the top of the screen, are they drawn from the whole school, 9 through 12, or just the senior cohort? And the answer is we're only looking for the reporting of numbers of seniors who meet each of those criteria. So you're not going to include 9th through 11th graders. Do you report all eligible students or only students who have come to you to say they would like to pursue the seal? And this is another big error that we find on these forms. We ask that schools report the total number of all seniors that fit into each category or that are eligible, regardless of whether the student has indicated an interest in earning the Seal of Biliteracy. So let's delve into section F. Again, our first subgroup are the number of senior current Ls who scored at least expanding on the most recent NYSSB exam, or those who earned a point through criteria 1A or B in a COVID exemption. Remember, if a student has gotten the COVID exemption, that carries with them throughout their entire high school career. So as we look at our current English language learners in F1, we want to find out, where do you get this data? Well, both your ESOL teachers and your school counselors, one of which you're going to have on the committee in each category, they should be able to give you the names of Ls who meet this criteria. We often get the question, what is the significance of the expanding score on the NYSSB? Well, we want to make sure that the students you are recruiting have the opportunity to be able to demonstrate the required level of English proficiency to get the seal. And if you have a student that comes to you at the beginning of senior year and they have no English, it's probably unrealistic to think that the student could go from emerging, which is that lowest level, all the way to commanding or intermediate high in a single academic year. So as we've talked to our experts, we have found that any student who's at least at expanding on the NYSSB lot can, within the course of their final year in high school, realistically reach the required level of English proficiency by graduation. Now, can an L who has received a score of received a score of at least expanding on the NYSSB slot still choose to pursue the seal? Yes. If you support that student, you can allow this. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but you need to be realistic about the amount of work that would be required to get the student from the lower proficiency level to intermediate high. So now let's go on to F2, the number of senior, former, or ever Ls. Where do you get the data for this? Well, your school counselor, again, that's one of the reasons they're on the Seal by Literacy Committee, should be able to give you the names of former Ls because they track that data in their student management system. Now, it's important for the counselor to do a very thorough search for former Ls, as a student could have exited L status in elementary school and therefore wouldn't necessarily be on anyone's radar at the high school level. You may also wish to survey students to ask if they speak another language at home. You can do this by surveying students. Some schools will put out a Google survey just to ask the entire senior class. You may have announcements saying, hey, if you speak a language other than English at home, we have an award for you. Come to a student interest meeting. You can make up a bulletin board that students pass by each day to pique their interest. Write an article in a school newsletter, or maybe a principal's e-blast or a website. The point is, we really want to make our former English language learners aware that they are eligible to get this distinction. Our next subgroup is F3. This is a pretty easy one to identify. This is the number of senior students whose home language is English and who completed or are currently completing a Checkpoint C World Language course. So let's kind of debrief what this is. You get this data from either the world language teachers, it's simply the roster of last year's junior class or this year's senior class, or you can get the school counselor on your committee to give you the names of students who meet this criteria. They're seniors, remember, their home language is English, and they completed last year with an 85 or better, or are currently completing a Checkpoint C course with an 85 or better. Now let's talk about what Checkpoint C is. Generally, languages are taught in 3 different checkpoints that are designed to be 2-year sequences. In general, Checkpoint A is 7th and 8th grade, Checkpoint B is 9th and 10th, and Checkpoint C is 11th and 12th. Anything beyond Checkpoint B, so that would be 10th grade, after which you take the locally developed Checkpoint B exam, anything after that is considered Checkpoint C. It's generally in junior or senior year. However, it is possible for a gifted student or perhaps a heritage speaker to take AP Spanish in 9th grade. That would do it. It could be called Level 4-5. It could be called AP, IB. It could be a college in the high school course. All of these are Checkpoint C. Now, I want to point out that this is only 1 year is required with an 85 in order to get a point towards the seal. So if a student takes the first year of the Checkpoint C sequence in junior year and gets an 85, they've earned that point for that criteria. Now, we hope that they will go on as a senior to take the next part of Checkpoint C, but they've already earned that point. So that will help them with their proficiency, ensure they get the seal, but they're not going to get a second point for the second year of a Checkpoint C course. The good news is that a student who is maybe right on the cusp of that 85 as a junior, but didn't just get it, they have another shot in the senior year to try to get that 85. Okay, the last subgroup, and this can be the hardest one to identify, F4. These are the number of senior students who were never identified as English language learners, but whose home language is something other than English. So where do you get this data? Well, we're hoping that the school counselor on your committee has access to information about languages spoken at home for all students. Because when students enter a district and they register, the families are asked, is there a language other than English that is spoken in the home? And that information is recorded. Now, if the student speaks English fine and is not identified as an L, that information is still recorded. And we're hoping that counselors can get access to that. These are kids that are bilingual and trilingual. They're just brought up that way, speaking English and their home language fluently. But because they're not identified as L's, sometimes that home language other than English falls through the cracks, and we don't want it to. We want to make sure that these bilingual students pursue the seal of biliteracy. So again, F4 is, oops, we got somebody drawing on the screen. Hold on a second. Let me get rid of those. It's always fun when people do that. Keeps me on my toes. So F4 are seniors who, oh, let me make sure I don't draw on the screen. There we go. Seniors whose home language is other than English, right? Again, you may want to survey students. So I would have my counselors ask all their students as they came in senior year, do you speak another language at home? And then they would note it if they find out. You could also ask all of your ELA classes one day to give a short spiel on the seal and say, hey, does anybody speak another language other than English at home? Because we have this award you can get. And sometimes we'd find, oh yeah, there are kids who went to Greek school when they were young, but it was never put on their registration document. You can also do the things we talked about before, announcements, bulletin boards, newsletter, etc. Again, it's all about the recruitment. So now it's easy peasy. We're on the downward slope with this form. Let's talk about section G. This section talks about languages spoken by SEAL candidates and taught in the school. So this is why we are asking that all eligible students be noted on the form, or the number of. We want you to identify the current L's, the former L's, and the heritage language speakers, so you can also identify the languages they speak, because that is something, if those students pursue the SEAL, you're going to have to identify adults that can assist the students if they're doing a project and evaluate the students. So it's important to get those languages. It's important to also enter the names of all languages in this section. We often get people who enter a language code like SPA for Spanish. Now, SPA is pretty obvious. I could guess that that's Spanish, but sometimes every year there are languages that come up that I've never heard of. And when you put a code in, that doesn't help me identify the actual language. So please type out the whole language name. And please make sure you're not entering general language categories instead of the name of the language. So often we'll get people who just put in Creoles. Creoles is not a language. Creoles is a language category. There are Haitian Creoles. There are French-based. There are English-based Creoles. We need the specific language that the students speak, because if the student pursues the SEAL, you're going to need to know the specific Creole that the student speaks. Because I'm telling you right now, if your student speaks a very challenging, say, English-based Creole, like could be spoken in Jamaica, that's very different from English, and you just have Creoles, you're not going to get somebody who actually speaks that language. Now, you also have to notate on this form the languages that are taught in the school. That's for G2. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, why are we asking for these languages? Well, in addition to the reasons that I already stated, did you know that you can earn the seal of biliteracy in English and more than one world language? More than 250 of your students last year in New York State earned the seal of biliteracy in English and 2 languages. More than 10 students did something even more phenomenal and earned the seal in English and 3 world languages. And we had our second student in New York State history last year who earned the seal in English and in 4 other world languages. Okay, so it's a great reason to be able to do that. Moving on to section H. This is where you put the names of your Seal of Biliteracy committee members, and it's pretty straightforward. You simply put first name, last name. For the administrator, we do ask that you put their title, and by title, we don't mean Miss or Mrs. or Mr. We mean, are they a principal? Are they an assistant principal? Are they the superintendent? For your world language teacher, we do ask that you put the language that person teaches, and we don't need you to put in more than just the 5. So if you have more than 5, that's okay. You're just going to list the people that are here, and anyone extra we don't need to have reporting on. Now, the Seal of Biliteracy Committee plans out how the SEAL program will be implemented and put the structures in place to make the SEAL possible. And it must consist of an administrator, an ELA teacher, an ESOL teacher, a world language teacher, and a school counselor. Now you'll see there's some information in parentheses after ESOL teacher. The vast majority of schools have English language learners in their schools, and they have, therefore, an ESOL teacher. Some of our schools, especially in more rural areas, do not have any Ls, and therefore they wouldn't have an ESOL teacher. If that's your school and you don't have any senior Ls or former Ls, you don't need to have an ESOL teacher on your committee. If you have eligible Ls or eligible former Ls, we do want you to have an ESOL teacher on that committee. And the Seal of Biliteracy Committee is generally led by the SEAL coordinator, who is one of these 5 people that's here. So we do get the question, can we have more than 5 members on the Seal of Biliteracy Committee? Of course, you can have as many as you would like, as long as the minimum required roles are filled, but you don't need to report anyone but the 5 required on the form. May one person fulfill more than one role on the Seal of Biliteracy Committee? For example, if you have a Spanish teacher who's also certified in ENL, can that person fulfill both roles? Well, it's possible. Again, especially if you have a very small school. We don't recommend it because the purpose of having these 5 people on the committee is to spread the work out and not overload the SEAL coordinator with doing everything. So please do your best to ensure you have everyone necessary on the committee and that the work is delegated out among those members. Now, section I looks really big, but you don't have to do a whole lot for this section. This is all about telling us which culminating project rubric you'll use. So let's take a step back. The culminating project in English and a world language are worth 2 points in each language for the SEAL. And therefore, it's a very popular option for students. The vast majority of students do a culminating project in either English or a world language or both to get those 2 points. So while it's possible for a student not to do a project and still get the SEAL, I'm still going to talk about this since most of our schools do this. If your students are completing a culminating project, you have to have a rubric that you use to evaluate the student's performance. Now, you're going to indicate in this section where it says I1, I2, or I3, which rubric you're going to use for world languages only. We don't require that you indicate which rubric you're using for ELA or English projects. We trust that you will use the rubrics that you've been using previously that are aligned to the English standards that have been adopted for a while at NYSSB. So you're only indicating the culminating project rubric that you will use for projects in a world language. Okay. Any rubric that you use, regardless of your choice of I1, I2, or I3, and we're going to go over theirs in a second, must be aligned to the relevant New York State learning standards. So there are 3 options for world language rubrics. Option I1. Let me just get everybody muted here just for a second. Okay. So option 1 is to use the suggested rubric from our office, the Office of Bilingual Education and World Language. And please understand, when we say suggested, it honestly means suggested, but you don't have to use it. You still have options I2 and I3. There's a lot of benefits, though, of using the rubric provided by my office because it's already pre-aligned to the standards. It already meets the 5 requirements. It's very easy to use. And by the way, you can use it in your regular world language class for all levels. If you choose I1, then you don't need to do anything else with this section. You don't submit our rubric back to us. You just check I1 and you're done. Your second option, I2, is to use a consortium rubric. So you can see in this section, I2, we have 9 different consortia that work together with their constituent districts on these culminating projects and have developed culminating project rubrics that have been pre-approved by NYSSB for use with the seal. If you work with any of these consortia, and you can see them on the screen from Broome Tioga to Tompkins Seneca Tioga, then all you have to do is check the consortium rubric that you use, and you do not need to submit it because we've already vetted that rubric. Your third option is to use a rubric that you have developed in-house at your school or district. If you do that, you do need to send a copy of the rubric to our office as an attachment, not a link, because we don't have access to your internal folders, following the submission of the seal notification form. We will evaluate the rubric based on some criteria I'm going to show you in just a second, and we will get back to you with any feedback or with the approval of your rubric. Now, the suggested rubrics. I want to show you where they are because that's one of our goals for today. On the OBEWL Seal of Biliteracy website, under the Culminating Projects section, which I will show you in just a second, there are 3 suggested rubrics corresponding to each of the 3 language categories. So I just want to explain this really quick. There are category 1, 2 modern languages, such as French, German, Italian, and Spanish. I apologize, it should say Spanish there, not German twice. And these have a target of intermediate high. All other modern languages are considered category 3, 4, and they have a target of intermediate mid. So why is it that we have different targets? Well, based on the research done by the Defense Institute, we know that learning certain languages that are closer to English take a certain amount of time to get students to a certain proficiency level. By the same token, languages that are quite different from English, we know take much longer, much larger number of instructional hours for students to reach the same proficiency level. And the example I'll give you is for an English dominant student learning Mandarin. They have to learn a brand new sound system, new vocabulary, new grammar, but they also have to do it using a different alphabet, a character system. And we know that that requires additional time. So therefore we have different targets. We also have rubrics for the classical languages, primarily Latin, but also ancient Greek and ancient Hebrew. Both modern Greek and modern Hebrew fall under the category 3, 4 modern languages. So I am going to exit the presentation just very, very quickly, and I want to make this change to the word Spanish because I don't want to not include my Spanish colleagues. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share, and then I'm going to open up the Seal of Biliteracy website. So let me stop my share. And then I still do want to keep, okay, good. I'm still recording on here. All right, so we're going to go to just any old web browser. And let me reshare my screen so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, here we go. So in your web browser, you're going to type in 2 words, NYSSB and NYSED. I don't even memorize our website. I just do that each time. It's generally the very first hit. You'll see New York State Education Department. And you click on it and you'll get to that site where you see all the lovely children from Bayshore on the steps with their medallions. So the culminating project rubrics are located in the accordion, this blue accordion here that says culminating projects, presentations, and rubrics. You'll click on it and it'll give you some information about the culminating project. And in this middle section, it talks about the rubrics for modern languages, 1, 2, modern language 3, 4, and classical. Now we have two options for each. You have a full-size rubric that has multiple pages, or you have a condensed rubric. Now I recommend the condensed rubric. It's a lot easier to use. And you just click it. It's a Word document, and I'll just open this up so that you can see it on the screen. And you'll see it's a 2-page document. It's going to meet all the criteria. It's got each of the 3 communication standards. It has the highlighted or target proficiency level of intermediate high, and it has a place for you to write information on the students. And so you can, of course, cater this to what you need, and we encourage you to think about using this, but you can also use it as a means of designing your own rubric if you would like. So just a quick note again, if you are using a consortia rubric, you can only not send one in to us if it is listed here on this page. So if you're part of a consortia or consortium, but it's not listed, you still do need to send in the rubric so that we make sure it meets the 5 requirements. So please consider doing that. Also, to reiterate, if you're using an in-house developed rubric by your school, you do need to submit it to our office via email for approval following the submission of the school notification form. So let's talk about this criteria here at the top. What does a rubric have to look like in order to be approved for use with the seal? Well, there are 5 criteria. The first one is that the rubric needs to exclusively measure proficiency in the language being assessed. So you cannot put information in there like student is well dressed, student exhibits poise in their speech. While those are things that we really want our students to do in a professional presentation, the seal is not about that. The seal is about language proficiency, and that needs to be the focus. The column headings of your rubric, as you saw with the OBEWL rubric, need to be the active proficiency levels, intermediate mid, intermediate high, etc. Oops, I accidentally clicked on that. It's going to open up. There we go. The next criteria, the performance descriptors that you have under each heading need to be aligned as well to the proficiency level. So when it says, I can present using strings of sentences, that's aligned to active proficiency levels. The rubric does need to indicate the required proficiency level to earn the seal. So if you remember when we looked at the OBEWL rubric, it had the target one highlighted, and that's just for the ease of use by the panelists who will evaluate students. And then finally, the rubric needs to separately address all 3 modes of communication: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. If you have any questions on this, we'll be happy to answer them. It does tend to be one of the heavier lifts for districts that are doing the seal for the first time. So we do recommend you consider using the OBEWL rubric in your first year of the seal. And then if you determine after you've got your sea legs that you'd really like to develop your own rubric, you can do that using this criteria in the following year. So again, here's that rubric that I showed you the bigger version of. And again, you can get those right on our website under the culminating projects section. Just keep in mind, you need to know the category of language. So if it's Spanish, French, German, or Italian are most commonly taught languages, that's category 1, 2. All other modern languages are category 3, 4. And our classical languages have their own rubric. If you want, we also have a rubric on our website to evaluate your rubric. So I just went over this, but it's a little bit more in detail, and you can see this here on the right. It gives you the performance criteria, and it's a 1-point rubric. Either it meets the criteria or it doesn't. And when you send in your school-based rubric, if you're choosing to make your own, this is the rubric that you will get back from us with an indication of whether it met the criteria. Now, I want to give a big shout out to our New York City DOE schools. Remember, we told you you don't have to fill out the school notification form if you are a New York City public district school, because it's done for you by the Division of Multilingual Learners. Well, by the same token, New York City public schools use what's called the Biliteracy Capstone Project rubric. This is issued by the Division of Multilingual Learners, so they have their own suggested rubric. And please make sure if you're one of the New York City public district schools that you're using that rubric. Okay, we are getting to the end of our forms. This is very exciting. So the remaining sections are called the acknowledgement and the electronic signature sections. So the acknowledgement, you don't have to do anything for that section. It's simply a radio button on the online form that you click. And by clicking, you simply agree to the seal criteria and that you will submit the required data on the end of your data form for any successful seal candidates. The last section of the form is called electronic signature of the designee of the building principal. Now, all this means is that the person filling out the form, who is generally the seal coordinator, is simply going to type in their name as the person submitting the form, and they're going to be called the designee of the building principal. This is not a special title. You don't get any extra salary for this. It simply acknowledges that you have talked with the principal, that he or she knows you are submitting this form, and that you have the authority to do so. You also commit to notifying either directly or via your building principal, your superintendent, that this form has been submitted so that they're aware you're offering the seal. So that's it in a nutshell. On the right here, you can see a screen capture of the online school notification form. And although it looks different than the template, it follows in lockstep every single question. So it'll be easy to enter in that information. So again, to submit your form, you're going to print out the template from the website. You're going to gather the data, and then you're going to click on the online form and enter your data into that form. Before we end the presentation portion of this and open it up for questions, I do want to give a shout out to our SEAL webinar series. You are in webinar number 3. But we actually have 7 additional webinars coming up, or sorry, 6, because today is listed there. December 4th, we'll be promoting the seal, and we have additional ones in 2024. In addition, we have a brand new one we're adding to the list for January 24th, and that is going to be preparing for the culminating project visits. Now, this webinar will be available for registration by December 1st, but it's for a very special group of seal coordinators. In short, NYSSB samples about 3 to 5 schools in each region each year and has a NYSSB representative come to see some of the student project presentations. And the idea is to support schools in the process as well as to provide them for feedback. That small number of schools, that 3 to 5 per region in each of 7 regions, they were already notified back in September that they were going to be visited. And it's for that very small population of SEAL coordinators that are going to be visited in the spring that we're offering this webinar, so you know what to expect. You can also get these handy dandy digital badges that you see here for attending these webinars. And of course, you get CTLE credit. We've had 2 webinars so far before today, and those webinar recordings and the post assessments will be available on our website in a few days. I do want to make a shout out for the SEAL Biliteracy Forum. I know many of you are already members. If you're not, these are monthly meetings that offer guidance and support on the SEAL of Biliteracy. You get the opportunity to ask questions about your programs, as well as to discuss and network with other coordinators. Attendance is completely voluntary. It meets once a month on a Monday, and you get CTLE credit for any meetings that you attend. We also have a Google Drive, so if you're not able to come one month, you can see the minutes and any other materials right in our Google Drive. The join link is right here. I'll also include it in the follow-up email that we send. And of course, you get this nice badge that you can use for your tenure application or on your social media or your website. We also have a wonderful group of people called the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network, or RBIRNs. There's one in each region of New York. They are listed here on both the right and the left, and they have resource specialists that can help you with your SEAL program. So please consider reaching out. You can also reach out to our office. And with that, of course, I have my contact information on this slide, which I will send to you. And one last reminder, if you are a New York City public district school and you are interested in offering the Seal of Biliteracy, you do not submit the school notification form, but instead you should contact the Division of Multilingual Learners at dml@schools.nyc.gov for more information. So as we look through our goals for today's session, I'm hoping that you feel confident that you could demonstrate proficiency in each of these 6 goals. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Ling Chao, to feed any questions to me.